30 minutes was because he couldn't handle online a session, and we couldn't do half of the stuff that we normally did. But his mother started missing sessions, and usually it's, I need 24-hour notice in order for you to pay. I mean, then you pay me if it's less than 24 hours. Well, I've been with him, they've been very consistent, and his mom got cancer and started going through chemo. And I would get a call a few minutes before. It's kind of like, well, I understand this. You have been
Yeah.
really good. And for for that specific client, I made an exception.
Yes.
And, right now, I was actually the one who kind of terminated it. I said, it was still going on when I left. I said, we're going to be done now. You don't need to think about me while you're going through the chemo and I'm here taking care of my granddaughter.
Yeah.
Well, we'll resume this when I get back in August or September.
Yeah. And then if she's feeling better, if her situation has changed,
Right.
it's a great opportunity to take it on. I am exactly, if somebody were to come up to me and say that they're missing the sessions because they're having these issues with chemo and that kind of stuff, my heart would totally be like, okay. If they've been
Right.
with me for a long time, if they're a brand new client, I might just try to say something like, now might not be the best time. I know in the beginning, like my beginning students are terrible at like getting the time right, getting into routine, all of that kind of stuff. And so I'm really lenient in the beginning. Like I tell them, hey, if you miss 3 sessions, I am lenient up to 3 times. I tell them what my leniency is in my policy. But after that, there will not be any makeups. There won't be whatsoever. That's what I've written down on paper. In reality, if I've got somebody who, I've worked with them for 3 years and they've only missed 3 sessions in those 3 years, right? It's a completely different
Right.
situation than somebody who's missed 3 times in the first month or, in the first 2 months, right? And so your leniency will change based off of that relationship. But at the same time, we always have to be mindful of, okay, is this the best interest for the child, for me, and for the parent? Right? Is there any
And
boundary I feel like that's being crossed or taken advantage of? If there is, then I need to take care of that. If I'm totally cool with everything that's happening, then fine, just keep going with it the way that it's going. Everything's fine. Um, I one person said mentioned that they never really had a problem with no shows at all because they would just work on some other stuff. And I'm exactly the same thing. If somebody doesn't show up, I just work on other stuff. But then they had a problem at one point when they had a no show late at night at 10 o'clock at night and they stayed for the entire session. I only stayed for like 10 or 15 minutes, but they stayed for the entire session and they were exhausted. And they're like, what do I do in this situation? It's like, you got to handle it the way you handle all the other situations, right? Like, if it's a no show, let people know the boundary of you've got to let me know 24 hours in advance. If you do, great. It'll be rescheduled or canceled or refunded, whatever the case may be. But if it's past that time, what is the consequence? If there's never any consequence, people will start
They're
walking
gonna
over that
take
boundary.
advantage. They will.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
have a
so
boundary where if they don't show, then they get charged for the full lesson. I mean, and that's because I teach chemistry and I've done the prep work for it. I know, and I have a lot of material that I already have pre-done, but I try to make my material specific for that student. So sometimes I'll just take what I have and copy and paste, but it's still a little prep work done within that. And if I don't get at least a 24-hour notice, that just it just kind of throws everything off. And not only that, you could have had another student in that slot as well. And
yeah.
so I charge for the whole lesson. Now I do have a thing where after the first time, I will go back and retell them, okay, this time I won't charge you. If it happens again, you will be charged for the second lesson. And that's just to make sure that I have it not only written in the contract that I have, but also it has been verbally expressed to the student and the parent as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had to do a couple cancellations. So and it actually like it hurt me because it was like Oh my gosh, I feel bad for like charging somebody for, for not even having a lesson. But I was like, but they knew what it was from the beginning. So there's no excuse. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do monthly, so they never even get to see the charge. It's just like, here's how many sessions you get in the month. So
right.
if you don't show up, I don't have to go after you for the money. I don't have to charge you. I don't have to push any buttons. I don't have to
No,
do anything.
correct.
So they totally forget about it. And I get to just go on with my business, which is really nice.
Hmm.
Because I like to ignore, I like to like skip all those kinds of like uncomfortable situations as much as possible. But
Yes,
sometimes
I
we
just
gotta
had
do
a
it.
it is uncomfortable. It is. It's like,
It
but
is.
I mean, you have some parents who really they really understand and they don't have a problem actually paying it because they knew what it was. And that's why I give myself at one time it's like okay, because I understand things happen, life happens. Stuff comes up. And so it's like I just wanted to, let you know that I do understand, but if it happens again, then next time I would
Mm-hmm.
have to charge
Mm-hmm.
you. So
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I
one of
feel
the
like
other
okay, go
boundaries
ahead.
I have is I save Mondays for the students in our area. In our area, school is only 4 days a week.
no.
Monday, there is no school for the 3 districts in our area.
Mm.
So some of those students I do online, some of them come to my home. So they go to school in our area from Tuesday through Friday.
Mm. That's so awesome. That allows you to
It
have some
is.
daytime hours too, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my Mondays are all, well, up until now, my Mondays were always booked. And it
Yeah.
was one right after another. And then I had the afternoon for the other after schools. And then my homeschool kids were Tuesday and Wednesday throughout the day.
Mm.
But if you weren't in one of those districts, you couldn't have the Monday. It was strictly for the 3 areas.
Mm. Nice. Nice. Yeah. And we get to make all those decisions. Like what
Mm-hmm.
makes the most sense for our business. I know,
Mhm.
Trisha, you were going to say something before.
Oh, I'm just having a big light bulb moment about the connections between this conversation about boundaries in our business and some of the things that I teach to my students who have, issues with managing school and a lot of stress around school. And it really is about what can you decide ahead of time? Because like I was thinking about how during the conversation about how like I teach them how to organize a binder, for instance. I have a little system, and I'm not a naturally organized person. But one of the things that I've realized is that I was doing a little research into like, why is clutter so stressful? And one of the things I learned in the research is that clutter is postponed decisions. So when we have clutter in our life, it reminds us of things we haven't made decisions about, and that creates decision fatigue. And so in a way, like, so when I teach kids about how to declutter to relieve stress, and decluttering is a process for relieving stress. Anyway, the whole point is that these decisions that you can make ahead of time, and this is what I teach my students too, like, how do you want to be? Let's make that decision first, not about like, oh, I'm so stressed. I have this test and I've got this stuff to do. Before we do any of that, let's first decide, how do you want to be this week? And so they might want to, I want to be productive this week. All right, you've made that decision then.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making that decision ahead of time. So now let's just declutter all that other stuff that might get in the way. And I feel like it's very similar about our businesses. Like as we learn more about like what stresses us out, then we get to declutter that. We can make that decision ahead of time and just go ahead and declutter all that wishy-washiness. Like that was one of the things, like when I was looking at that post that inspired this conversation, is like, there's so much stress and like trying to figure out, well, should I do this or should I do that? And then there's this thing, then there's that thing. And like, if we, once you realize like, I can declutter that decision now, like I'm going to make a decision about that ahead of time. And then I don't have to go back and forth about these things. And it works on the other side too. Like that client doesn't have to go back and forth. But, I think they get stressed too about like, oh, could I maybe ask to make that up? Or am I putting her out if I ask her that? I've already made the decision. Like I've already told you, I can't reschedule sessions. My schedule's too tight. So So that takes the pressure off of them to even have to ask or try to negotiate with me. We're not making that choice.
Yeah. One thing that I've done is I've actually started taking less students sometimes in the evening so that I always have a spot where I can do a makeup until, of course, I don't make that decision and I put somebody in that spot. And then I get into the point where Trisha is, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm unable to make any makeups up at this time because I'm too busy. There is no person who runs their business perfectly, just so you guys know. We all it's all trial and error. We're all, the money does come down to, it's like, okay, well, who couldn't use the extra, $100, right? To do this or that, or whatever the case might be. Just, you know what, you guys have a community that's going to support you no matter what. So whenever you guys have a question, feel free, drop it inside of the Ultimate Support Group for Online Tutors. We're there to support you, talk you through it. And who knows, maybe you'll be on the next time and be part of our conversation. So thanks you guys for joining us today. It's been really great talking about boundaries. And I think these kinds of conversations help us all be a little bit more mindful as to what boundaries do we need to be setting inside of our business so we can run the business that we want to run instead of our business running us. Thanks for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your